time for VUC. In our 11th year, with us on our journey this year, Simwood.com. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Greenfield Tech. Go to greenfield.tech and see how they can make your tech dreams both feasible and affordable. Our conference bridge is the best you'll ever find at zipdx.com. VUC.me is hosted on Bluehost. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are provided by VUC661.com. Okay, as he unmutes, hello, and welcome to VUC661 for September 1st. Wow, vacation's almost over. This is about Mastodon, a social network on open web, based on open web protocols. I'm not going to read that. We'll talk about this in a minute in detail, but first, a couple of announcements. First of all, you can call in because a lot of you have Mastodon questions. You can phone in from a lot of cities in the world, something like 48 world cities. Go to voxbone.com/VUC. And you will see local rate phone numbers that you can dial in to join the conference. And you can listen, but you can also speak, talk to our guests, Eugen and Hugo, who I'll introduce in just a moment. I got this idea because I try everything, and most of us in the VUC do try all these things. If they don't, I drag them into it. So we have our own little instance. And I also, the Mastodon.social, create an account, VUC Fridays, which is the same as our Twitter account. If you have questions, I will be watching that. And hopefully it won't go bing. I'm not sure if I adjusted it right. We're going to get into the details right now, but before we do, I'm going to introduce our guests, and they will each talk briefly, as we always do. We ask how you got into technology in general. What brought you to technology? Why are you not doing plumbing, which is probably much more better salaries? So we'll start with Eugen, but Hugo, will have you right after a little summary of what brought you into tech.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. To answer your question, that's actually a good question, which I haven't thought about really. It just never occurred to me that I had any other choices. I became interested in computers pretty much straight away when I was gifted one at the age of 8. I started with video games and eventually just started exploring how to make games. And from there, I navigated my way through to making websites, and from there to making programs. And here we are, I made Mastodon.
Okay, we'll get into the history of Mastodon itself too in a moment. But Hugo, I want to call on you for the same question. You are, by the way, one person who is running the host. It's Mastodon, masto.host. I already made that mistake once. Let me get you to unmute and say a little bit about what brought you into technology.
Well, I would say that I never liked to run on a schedule. I hated to wake up in the morning and go to a job, and so I always tried to find alternatives to regular jobs. And I came across the internet when it was just starting here to come up in Portugal, and yeah. Like I fell in love. It was just something like I found something that I really liked to do, and I couldn't manage to do it on my own time. I didn't have to keep a schedule. So it was like this, a combination of these two things.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, that's fair enough. Those are two, both of you have pretty original reasons. Hugo, I'm going to ask you, not Hugo, but Eugen, going to ask you now how you came to do the project. I mean, what was the inspiration for it? And then you can go as long as you want and talk about actually what it is. And we'll do a little bit of a demo in a few minutes to show people this. Michael's got his screen set up to do this. We can take a look at some of the features. But first of all, how did you even get started? Where did the idea come from? Why did you do it, and when? That enough questions for one?
Interestingly enough, the original idea wasn't something that I came up with just by myself. I had a friend called Ryan, who, when I was growing up, we did blogs together. We were in a community of bloggers, and we sort of talked a lot. And he was a programmer, and he was into the whole federated networks, free software sort of stuff. So you could say he was my gateway drug towards free software. So that's how I learned about federated networks in the first place. Back then, StatusNet was still called Identica, I believe. I checked it out. I tried it. It wasn't really much back then, and eventually I just forgot about it for a few years. And then a year ago, it sort of came to me that this thing must still be around, and I wanted to find out how it's doing. At the same time, there were some issues with the Twitter platform that I've been having and that people were having, so I felt like there was a certain zeitgeist for a change. I mean, my initial idea wasn't to like make a big thing, but I just wanted to play around with the concept, and so I started working on a prototype. And that prototype was done back when I was still at uni. And it was very, very barren. It was basically API only. It talked to the GNU social servers, and I was able to use it using the console and using curl, but it was nothing more than that. So once that was done, I was pretty satisfied. But of course, that's not marketable to anyone. I went back to uni. Exams started. Actually, preparations for exams is probably a big reason for why I did that prototype, to distract myself from doing what I should have been doing. After the exams were done and I finished university with a computer science degree, I had that sort of time where I was thinking, okay, what should I do next? I have some time where I can either look for a job or can try myself at something. And so I decided to try finishing Mastodon into something that's more like what I intended for it to be. And so I sat down, and that's when I started working on the user interface. That's when I think a month or two later, I announced it on Hacker News, which was then reposted on Product Hunt. That's where the initial surge of users came, and it sort of kickstarted from there.
Unmute myself. Excellent explanation. And I'm going to ask you, Hugo, when you became interested in hosting Mastodon instances, because a lot of people in the open source world will be happy to download the tarball or whatever form it's in, or no, it's on Git, I guess, right? And they, make their own. And certainly everybody on this call, on the panel, Andy, James, even me, and Corrado, we could do this, but I don't do that anymore. I'm not interested in that, and that's why I found you, Hugo. But when did this start for you? And tell us a little bit about the service, which, by the way, is at masto.host. Don't forget to unmute.
Okay. I started the service because when I tried to join, when I first heard of Mastodon, like when there was this big surge of news in April, March, around that, I was reading a lot of blogs about it and blog posts. And so I came across, and I wanted to create an account, but Mastodon.social was closed the registration. And so I was like, where do I sign? I didn't know where to sign. And then I realized, okay, but I'm technical, I can host one of these things. So I started looking around for ways of, okay, let me try and play around and host my own. And I did, I created mine. And then I started to look at how could I make it easy for people to create their own, if it was possible, because I have another service that I run in Portugal. There is a hosting service just for the Portuguese market of regular websites. And I started to compare and think like, okay, if I could host like multiple instances of this inside the same server, I could do this very relatively cheap. And this could be interesting because it would open the door for many people that would never be able to know how to install, how to update the instance. And yeah, and so I just started playing around and finding solutions, testing like what is the best way. I like probably there was like 4 iterations of the hosting service. Everybody has been moving around from system to system, and they don't even know it because I've been learning at the same time as I've been creating this. It was just something I did for fun to know if I could do it, but yeah, it ended up having some interest from the people, and so yeah, that's basically that's why I started it, and right now I have like 100 instances hosted with me, and now it's just to maintain it, and yeah, I enjoy it. It has been pretty uneventful, and I've been able to maintain the instances running quite smoothly. But the service is still in beta. It's something that I'm still testing. It's 3-4 months old. The service 5 probably, but yeah, it's very new, and I'm trying to see what happens. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, excellent. And I'm going to present, hopefully. Ooh, how do I do this? There we go. All right, here's some statistics. I'm not entirely sure where they come from. So I don't know if this is Eugen or somebody else is just running some kind of a script, but this is supposed to be from sometime today. And it's interesting to note, 822,306 users, 1164 known instances. That number has gone down actually from the last time I looked. And that's probably because people like me who are experimenting, they might run an instance and they might decide that they're really not crazy to keep running it. You know, I don't know if we'll keep running our instance, but I do encourage everyone who's interested in this at all to go ahead and do that. 706, just a real quick run through here. There's been 51 million posts. I mean, this is huge penetration for a project that actually has, as far as I know, no really big help on being promoted or anything. It's just kind of a word of mouth thing, plus things like the VUC, what we're doing here. So let me stop that. And I've got a whole bunch of things, bouncing icons that are demanding my attention. So let me see what this is. And we're going to go back to Eugen anyway, because I'd like to hear the story now, or the actual reason why for other people they would be interested in it. Talk a little about federation and the difference between platforms like Twitter, and especially you mentioned status.net and Laconica, which I was also on and played around with and was trying to even write some documentation because the documentation was horrible for that when it first started. Is that even still running? I don't know, but I see a huge difference with Mastodon. Maybe you could explain all that, Eugen.
Right. So Mastodon is a federated social network. Federated can be used interchangeably with decentralized. It's just a form of decentralization. So when you're choosing to use Mastodon, you're choosing a decentralized service instead of a centralized one. And so here's where most of the perks actually come from. There's some extra perks that are just implementation details, but basically when you're using Twitter, you're giving a massive company your details, your data, and that company, if it's mismanaged or if it's in some way malicious, you're basically in their hands. If they go bankrupt, everything's gone, the data's gone, the service that you've been using for many years is gone. That's a problem. I mean, previously I thought, before I started doing Mastodon, I thought maybe Twitter should be like a public utility because it's really just a piping system for messages. However, I think the decentralized approach is actually kind of better than making a centralized company into a public service, because there is not a single point of failure. A server of Mastodon, like Mastodon.social, could go down if the servers go on fire or something. And obviously, the users of Mastodon.social would be affected and would be very unhappy with that disaster. But everybody else, the entire social network that's outside of Mastodon social, will still persist and will continue operating as normal. And then eventually, when Mastodon.social comes back, everything will be back to normal. The other thing is that when one company is controlling the communications, it doesn't just allow them to analyze a lot of the data. I mean, obviously, when we're talking about public data, they could analyze it regardless of where it is, whether it's on Twitter or somewhere else. I mean, Google basically just does that on the internet. But they can enforce their own ideas of what should be done with that data. For example, the government of Turkey can go to the Twitter company and ask some tweets to be censored in Turkey, and they'll do that. And this is possible because Twitter can unilaterally decide what to do with that stuff. So when you've got a decentralized network that's operated by completely independent either individuals or organizations, I mean, it's going to be pretty hard for the government in Turkey to go to every single instance administrator and to ask for something to be removed. On the other hand, this allows different communities to sort of coexist without stepping on each other's toes too much. Because for some people, don't really want to continuously experience certain ways of ideas and speech that is harmful to them or antagonistic. So what decentralization allows you is to enforce your own community rules in your own place. So while you can't censor the whole network, you could definitely moderate your own instance, just like you could moderate a forum and keep up a certain standard of communication. So there is some of the perks that come with decentralization. And then obviously Mastodon has a high on Twitter, which is very, very useful for many people. I mean, it's still kind of arbitrary. I picked 500 characters just out of thin air. I know that Facebook allows, or used to allow, 400 characters, and Tumblr posts are completely unlimited. And I just thought, okay, Tumblr posts can get a little bit too long. I mean, they can be basically infinite, and you have to scroll through the whole thing. And Facebook posts are a little bit too short. I've run into the limit myself back then. So I thought 500. And the reason I think there should be a limit is because, I mean, you don't want to have people writing essays in that because it is a microblogging network and not a blogging network. You don't want to have all the things that come with blogging, like headlines, blog quotes, rich text formatting, all that stuff that belongs to blogging. We just want to keep it simple and just, right to the point. So 500 characters, and you can still chain together replies to sort of get more information in. Now, for 40 characters, because 400 is less than a text message. To express yourself in a concise and in a comprehensive way in that few characters. Oftentimes, people have to either shorten their words and mess up their grammar, or just sort of skip their thoughts and not explain themselves properly, which leads to a lot of confusion, which leads to a lot of discussions that are based simply on confusion or misunderstanding. So that's another point. And I think the default TweetDeck-esque interface is also another perk because it's really, really real-time. It's almost like a chat room. And it allows you to consume a lot of information very quickly. Some people don't like it. Some people prefer to have a single stream of content, but I mean, you can still do a different thing with apps and differently that way. All right, I think I've been talking for a really long time. I'm sure I should give up the microphone now.
Well, we needed to hear that. That's why the questions were asked. And I think you did a really good job of explaining your philosophy. And I was going to ask about the problem of that Twitter has, for example, of things like maybe shutting the president off or some hate speech and so on. But I believe you touched on that when you were talking about the fact that if you're running your own instance, maybe, I don't know if you did get to that. This kind of a detail in how these sites are federated. And by the way, I've tried to explain this to people. The superficial thing, when you're looking at this TweetDeck-like setup, you can look at the federated, the local timeline has all of the people on your instance. The federated timeline has, correct me if I'm wrong, the federated timeline has all of the stuff that anyone is following in your instance. I think that's right. And you can nod your head, I can see. Is that right? Yeah. So the point is, somebody is following the famous PAWU or whatever those things are, that feature a lot of not unsafe for work things. You need to be able to filter that on your end. Let's get into that. I can't explain it, but I know you can, Eugene. This undesirable content, whatever it may be, it can be dealt with on two ends. So let's hear about that. How do you deal with that specifically?
Right. So first, a little explanation of how technologically the whole thing works. You could metaphors for this. On one hand, the protocol we're using at the moment, which is the whole network right now, is called OStatus, and you could think of it as like a glorified feed reader, right? Each user is actually a feed of updates. And what the servers do is they subscribe to those feeds, and that's how they get updates, right? So each user has a feed, and you're subscribing to those feeds. And then if you're sending messages to someone, like mentions, or you follow them, etc., it sort of like delivers your message to them specifically. It's called, that protocol is called Salmon because it goes upstream. So yes, and exactly, you can control the content on both ends, either on the sending one or the receiving one. Obviously, as a subscriber, you have the option of just unsubscribing or filtering the content as it comes in. So if you're unhappy with an instance like PAWU, where there is lots of not safe for work pictures, which may be borderline illegal in some jurisdictions, you have the option of just completely filtering out posts from PAWU, or you could go the bit easier route and just, there is an option to just filter out the images and leave the text as is. And then obviously on the sending end, you as the administrator of the instance have the full capacity or users that are registered on your instance, like on the forum.
Okay, it took me a second to get the focus right. I was briefly showing Michael's screen here, but it doesn't really mean much unless Michael, are you there, by the way? Yeah, he looks like he's moving, so because he had a call a moment ago. If you could click the menu, the settings on each of the columns, we can get an idea of what these things do. So on the home feed, you can show, I can barely read it. You can click those things to show, I can't even see it. Michael, can you say what you read? There we go. Show boosts. The boosts are like retweets, by the way. So, oh, there you go. We got to show boosts and show replies. So you have the choice of seeing that's your timeline personally. The next column over, which happens to be notifications, there's the menu, and this is much more populated by desktop notifications, push notifications, show it in the column, play sound. I thought I was going to say play around. Play sound, show in column, place. Oh, we're on the next ones of mentions and boosts and so on. Pretty fine, pretty granular control. I think that's great. Why don't we go to the local? I mean, people need to really just go onto an instance and try it. So, look at this. Click on the show more that Andy sent. I hope it's not anything. Oh, Good. There's a way to filter things that you think might not be safe for work. Let's see, what else is there on? That's local. That's all of us, and there's not that many of us. We go to Federated, and we've got Goldie Ice saying, hello, pal. Hi, pals. Bunch of things. These are people who one of us, well, there you go. There's Awuga's question. By the way, we need to ask that. And that was for Eugene. And basically, do you see Mastodon changing the world? And if yes, how? Good question.
Yeah, I would really like to see Mastodon changing the world. That is an extremely ambitious goal. I am just one person, and this is an open source project, and I'm not sure there is a lot of precedent for literally changing the world with those givens. However, I think we've started. We've made first steps towards that direction. Certainly after April, Mastodon has become perhaps not widely known among the general public, but I have a feeling that it's entered the public consciousness in a way that sort of on the fringe of understanding that there is an alternative to Twitter and Facebook and centralized social networks, that there is something out there which is not bad, which is in some way maybe better. For most people, the problem is still the network effect. Obviously, they want to have their friends already on there before they join. So that's, I think, the main the main obstacle towards full world domination. Yeah, I think that answers the question, probably.
If I can, hello, Eugen, it's Corrado speaking. I have a word of encouragement that most of the guests and hosts in this place know very well. And there is a open source project that has changed the life of millions of people, and it's called Asterisk. And that started as an open source with just one guy putting down the head and doing something that he thought was due to be done. And you did that, and I'm really happy that you did it.
Thank you.
Sorry about the silence. The problem I'm having, first of all, I muted you by accident, Hugo, when I was reaching for the screens. We are running these things on an 11-inch, single 11-inch screen. And I was looking for the better stats that you posted, Eugene. So let's just call out right now and ask if anyone has any questions, either on the panel, I'm sure somebody does, or also on ZipDX. If you are phoned in, I don't have that interface. I'm not looking at it, so Michael knows if there are many new people on it or not. You would hit *6 to speak, and I'm just killing time while you're hitting *6. Or if we have stuff on IRC, again, expecting help from people like Andy and James. James!
Yeah, I've got a quick question.
You have many
I
questions.
know that in the user interface, there's you have the ability to report people if they do things that you don't like. Where do those reports end up if you're hosting it somewhere like in the cloud? Who actually gets to do the moderating?
The moderator is your...
Oh.
We have lost.
Oh, so it's not just me. Okay.
Eugene.
Well, that's while we're waiting for his lag to come back. It's not obvious that he can hear us either, but Eugene, if there's an issue here, so while that's happening though, here's the page that he posted. He's still trying to get in here. So.
Yeah, it's probably a question that Hugo can answer.
Well, but he's still trying to talk. Unfortunately, we can't seem to. Stop the presenting. There we go. I'm also having issues. I don't know if you're hearing me okay, but
you're loud and clear, Randy. No problem.
Oh, okay. See if Hugo can answer this question.
Eugene's just come back again.
Okay.
So where were we? We had a problem with your lag.
Sorry, did I cut off? Internet is acting up.
Unfortunately you did.
you're about 5 seconds into your long spiel, and then you just suffered 100% packet loss.
Right. Okay. So the reports go only to your instance administrator, to whoever is hosting you. Else.
So, James, could you report somebody on
Yeah,
our
let's...
because Michael is on that page. Well, right now, yeah, he should be.
Okay, I've reported Corrado.
Oh, thank you very much.
Let's see.
Well,
we have to go.
I thought, as Corrado is probably the least likely person to ever have a report raised against him.
Carpetbagger.
Yeah, I thought I'd make him the bad boy today.
Okay, we need Michael. We need to go to. I think. Well, where do you see these, Eugene? Actually, I guess you'd see them in the admin panel. Oh, he may not have the admin panel. Come to think of it, it would be in the preferences. But you know what? You probably don't. Let me see if I can.
I don't believe. Oh, preferences.
Find it. No, and I'm afraid if it's admin, it's over on the right column, preferences. Let me see what this looks like.
Authorized apps import.
Of course, I'm on the wrong instance too. So another thing I wanted to talk about choosing instances, and I think, all right, I've got to change.
Okay, whilst you're playing with that user interface, can I ask another one, which is how do you go about interfacing to other systems? Because one of my favorite open source projects is Matrix. The reason we love Matrix so much is that it's quite easy to interface it into other messaging systems like IRC and SMS. So what do you do when it comes to interfacing to other bits and pieces, Eugene?
Well, Mastodon is not technically a multi-protocol app. Matrix is really good in that it indeed supports all of these bridging options to completely different protocols. Mastodon does not have that. Mastodon initially started as an OStatus application. OStatus is a suite of protocols which is like just a couple standards which a few other applications also implement. For example, VUC661, social, which used to be, or Tika, that used to be the same thing. Hubzilla, Radmatrix, they all support OStatus. And these softwares kind of form what we call the Fediverse, because they can all interact with each other. Matrix cannot interact with Mastodon, to my knowledge, unless they have made a special bridge or something. But it's definitely not something that's built in. Now, we are currently in the process of upgrading the Mastodon network to a newer, different protocol called ActivityPub, which has been in development for a couple, I don't know, a couple months. It's definitely longer than a couple months. It's newer. It supports more features that we actually need that weren't in OStatus. It's more flexible, and it's more of a network to a new protocol, which is actually a really frustrating job, because usually federated networks do not switch protocols halfway through. I mean, the people who developed Signal, for example, they said they get a lot of critique for making Signal a centralized app. And what they say is, oh, we wanted to keep it developed, so it's impossible to do if it's decentralized, so we stuck to a centralized service. And obviously, you don't see email upgrading from SMTP to something else. So this is a challenge. But I think we've figured everything out, and we're going to see how it works out in like a couple weeks.
Okay, and I'm going to show the famous report that Corrado finger. This is what the admin sees. It's a Corrado, nice picture, and it's reported. Actually, is there a detail in here though? It says reports created by this account for this account, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're unrepentant. You get
Was there
reported by a jolly decent chap.
But oh, that was the detail. You could have said he posted stuff I didn't like or something, right? Anyway,
Could you add a comment to that report or not?
Yeah,
Yes, you can add comments to reports.
I raised a second report with a comment. Sorry, I was hurrying too fast.
Well, let's see if we can get that real quick. All right, if we're looking at this, hello, what happened? There we go. And the second one, oh, and I need to scroll. I'm all on the same screen, so this is behind. No, that's it. Noisy. Is that what it says? Oh, silence account suspended. So yeah, are we seeing this? I believe we should be. Mark has resolved. Silence account, suspend account. Silence would be.
Well, yeah, I think we
for
probably better mark that one as resolved because Corrado is a
yes,
nice sort of chap anyway. So,
well, as I'm the admin, I'll
Thank
decide
you,
these things, James.
well, you just want to ban him.
I will be the judge. Well, now that we know that, we can.
You're the hanging
tell
judge.
James
Yeah.
to stop. Yeah, hanging. Anyway, okay, so that's interesting because it shows quite well the controls available to the admin, and that's very clear. What are you going to do? I'm going to suspend. I'm going to silence. Silence, I suppose, would be you shut them up. They're muted, and you write them and go, "What's this trip about? What are you posting? You know, please don't do that anymore." And we'll silence you. Is that how that works?
Silencing is also could be called sandboxing or shadow banning. It essentially puts them into an echo chamber where they can see other silenced people and they can see their own posts and they don't notice anything is different, but nobody outside of their sphere can actually see them. So it's kind of like lets you, if it's not enough for a ban, but they're really annoying to everybody else, or they're sending harassing messages to like people who don't know them, you just sort of shut them off in a quarantine and they sort of keep going there.
So the quarantine, sorry, that would be the quarantine include, so the people that are following the silenced account and the people that the silenced account is following would be seeing the messages, but nobody else.
The people who follow the silenced account would continue seeing the messages and interact and everything properly. They kind of opt into that, but not the people who the silenced person follows. They wouldn't. That doesn't have any effect.
Okay, thank you.
It's an interesting nuance between this and other things like Twitter and so on. So good options for admin. I'm not going to go through all of the options for admin. What I would suggest is that you contact Hugo. Get yourself an instance. You can afford $5 a month. Do it for a month. He won't mind. And to play around with it because it's really fascinating. Hugo, I have a question and more questions for you now concerning your work. You'll need to unmute, considering your work day to day with the platform. So I wrote you and asked for the platform. I guess somehow there's a Patreon or something. A payment was made. You asked me what the URL would be, what the domain, the domain would be, subdomain. This one happens to be mastodon.randulo.com. It could have been masto.vuc.me. Maybe we'll change that. Change that because you're a nice guy, and we'll change that up. But you did arrange a certificate, if I'm not mistaken, right? The SSL certificate's in place, which is something a lot of services won't do, especially such a reasonable cost. You know, and that's a problem. I should mention this. People sometimes ask why live.vuc.me is not HTTPS. It's because Google doesn't want to mess with doing certificates for you. On the other hand, if you have an instance, if you have a domain name for a publication on Medium, they were for a long time just creating the certificate for you and installing it. Because let's face it, if you're using masto.host, there's no way you can install it. But that brings me to my question. What access does anybody have? I'm going to guess none, Hugo, because you're doing it all, right? There is no SSH into the server or anything like that, right? Or is there?
No, there isn't. It's the same thing as the shared hosting that you can get for your website. The main reason I block most access, and I even don't allow to do changes. Initially, I thought I could allow it and allow some changes. But as the time went on, I realized that people shoot themselves on the foot. It's like they run into a blog post, they see, oh, here's something for me to copy and paste and put it there, and then it just all goes down, and I am the one that has to deal with it. And then probably I don't even know what they did, and how to fix what they did, and so it's a nightmare. Yeah, so everything is locked outside, but I do everything. My main goal is, okay, I deal with the technical stuff. You don't need to know anything that goes on behind. If it has SSL, if it doesn't, it does, but you don't need to know. Most people don't know about it. So the reason is just I want people to be updated, to have a stable foundation, and I don't want them to even have to think about this. There are people that complain about certain things that they would like to change. I allow some little hacks to customize, like the VUC and little stuff like that. But it's all done via email. You email me something, I talk back to you, and there is no interface. There is nothing like that, because I think it would bring like a complexity that the service doesn't need. You email me, I'll answer you. I try to be friendly. If you behave, everything will be okay. And yeah, and I think that's the right now at the stage that we are on. I think is the way that it will work best. In the future, we don't know, but right now it's I prefer to have it like this, and like this I'm freed to only like spend an hour a day, something like that, running the service. I'm always online because I'm doing other stuff. This is not a business, it's just something I do for fun. I'm not really making much money with it. It's I probably am not even making money with it. It's just something that I'm doing for fun, that I can get some I can pay a dinner with. But I want to see how it goes, and then to keep learning. Yeah.
Well, I think it's an excellent way for people to get started, and that's how I got started and was able to actually do it, because I wasn't going to go through all the trouble of downloading and installing it. I would have asked Andy to do that, but so he should be very happy, Hugo, that we found you, because he didn't have to do it.
I would have enjoyed it, actually, I think.
Well, maybe you should then. You can start on that next.
I also have some questions.
Okay, let me just say one thing, which is I admire the system of email, Hugo. I know that that doesn't scale, so if you had thousands of platforms, you wouldn't be able to do it. But the good part of that, really, and people should be very grateful, is that you're kind of vetting what they want. So if they send you some CSS, I assume these are mostly cosmetic stuff, maybe, besides requests. So they're going, well, I want this to be green or whatever, and here's the CSS to do it or whatever. You can see if by any chance some kind of malicious thing would be possible. And I think that's a huge advantage. And there's a huge truck, speaking of huge, coming, and you maybe can hear that. So over to Andy.
Yeah, I've been looking through at some of the apps that are available, and of course they all interface through to what looks like a quite well thought out API, which is reasonably well documented as well. So there are mobile clients for Android and iOS, and alternative web apps and desktop clients. So I'm presuming that they're all really presenting the same information in a different way, so another user interface pretty much. But some of the other clients here are of more interest. Cross-posting to Twitter, which, although that seems to have died a death, that seems to have stopped development now. RSS feeds, various WordPress plugin. There are lots of things here. Is there anything in particular that you're looking at coming up in the future that you think will really help this to expand a bit?
Yes, in particular, the cross-posting to Twitter is a topic which has been raised again and again since the very first time Mastodon has been brought up to anybody in public. People do not want to abandon either audience. In the best case, in the worst case, they just don't want to abandon the Twitter one and they stay there. So having an ability to for their content to go to both platforms at the same time is like a huge feature that they really, really want. On the other hand, it's also like people on Twitter use Twit longer to post longer text posts. There is an idea that Mastodon could be used the same way or start to be used in the same way, and sort of like pave its way into people's minds that way. Now, there is a bit of a both an infrastructural and a little bit of an ideological problem with putting that sort of functionality straight into Mastodon core code. I'm not too excited about putting the Twitter API, which is proprietary and centralized and very, very specific, into the code for Mastodon, which in all other parts is just focused on open web standards. So what I've been always looking for is for some app to emerge, which sort of uses the Twitter API and the Mastodon API as a sort of bridge. There have been a couple attempts. Most cross-posters that I've come across are like personal ones where you run a daemon on your PC or Raspberry Pi or whatever, and it does the thing for you personally. I've been looking for an app which is like a web app where people could sign in with both accounts and it would start working for them. There actually was one like that. I forget what it's called, but I gave it a test drive. It had like a little testing phase. It was working fine. It seemed to disappear though. But yeah, that's I think the major one that I'm looking for. Other than that, I'm just excited to see any sort of apps making use of the Mastodon API. Indeed, I've been trying to put a lot of thought into making the API reasonable and easy to use. And whenever I haven't documented something well enough, somebody would pester me about it until I did. So there is documentation for everything as well. But while we're on the topic of integrations, there is something I'm looking forward to most of all, and that idea only really came to me yesterday. So I've already mentioned that we're upgrading to ActivityPub, which is a new protocol that is very flexible. A protocol like ActivityPub could be used not only for a Mastodon type service where it's microblogging and sort of it's Twitter-esque, but it could be used for something like a YouTube or a SoundCloud or something like that. Any sort of platform which deals with things that people upload and people following each other. There is an application called Media Goblin, which sort of intends to be that, to be the media server based on ActivityPub. Unfortunately, it's not very far into development, and the person who's behind it is busy working on other stuff. So that might not be the silver bullet to this topic. However, if something like that existed, the integration with Mastodon would just be amazing because you could imagine Mastodon messages coming in through as comments on this YouTube type service. And you could imagine videos or sounds from that service coming through as messages in Mastodon. And that would be amazing. And yeah, that's what I'm dreaming of.
Oh, that's really quite interesting. Certainly the integrations with this and what you can do with it is an interesting area. If you look at things like Slack, which starts off as not as a social network, just as a repository for whatever messages, and you can poke all sorts of stuff into it. You could do much the same with this, I think, if you spent the time doing it. So you could almost make this a cross between a social thing and a work environment as well. I don't know if you've given any thought to a commercial usage within companies at all.
I have indeed considered Mastodon could be used in intranet networks for companies. I don't have a lot of experience working at large companies. I've worked at one, and it was 6 people, the entire company. So I don't know how high the demand is inside companies to have their own social network. I know that Google has one. They're using Google Plus, apparently, for internal communications. So yeah, something like that could be done. I mean, Mastodon does not, people always have this sort of misconception that Mastodon is sort of like BitTorrent, and then once you turn it on, it sort of like federates with everything at the same time, and it's sort of data exchange. But it's really on demand, right? So you just start a fresh server, it's empty, and it doesn't, like, nobody knows that it's there. You don't know who's outside until you start using it. So on something like an intranet network, where it's cut off from the internet, it could be used as a secure platform social network for employees only. It could be used in education for the same purpose as well.
As I posted in the IRC, Yammer was done for that very purpose, and I don't know how they're doing. They were specifically for, and of course I tried it. I think we even set up a Yammer for the VUC for about 10 minutes, but because they had a free version. But that's a good point. So we need to look at, does anyone know about Yammer, whether it even still exists? I believe it does. James, you could look that up for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe Yammer still does exist, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
The worrying thing here is the thing that says parent organization Microsoft Corporation.
Oh yes.
So, oh, they bought Yammer, of course. Forgot about that.
Yes. So it probably doesn't exist very much anymore.
Yep. Like Skype.
Wow. All right. Any other questions or topics we could follow? We could evoke here.
Yeah, can we quickly run through there? I just had a quick look, and there appears to be a whole plethora of smartphone clients all using Mastodon or fronting Mastodon. So which one is the best one to use, Eugen? Which one do you use?
Right. There are no official apps for a starter. People always ask which one is the official one. I've purposefully never made an official app because I think it's more valuable when there is a rich third-party ecosystem and when there is no favoritism for the particular app. Like, for example, the Twitter app ecosystem is very much dead because only the official one gets unlimited tokens. I have an Android device, which is also quite old, so I can't really say much about iOS apps or Windows apps. I know that Amarok for iOS is a popular choice. I know the person who's making that. I have personally contributed to the Android app Tusky. Though honestly, through the recent developments with the Mastodon web UI, it works quite well in the Chrome browser on Android. It works pretty closely to a native app. So recently, I've just been using that instead of any apps.
And doesn't Tusky make use of a server so it's pulling stuff through their end to?
Indeed, there is a certain level of proxying. I'll explain. So push notifications are a feature that we've come to love about apps because you forget something is there and then you get your phone vibrating when somebody messages you, and that's invaluable. And they're really hard to do when you're dealing with a federated platform because you have one app and one app developer, and you have like 1,000 servers which would be sending the messages, but the app has no way of like authenticating it. Like the Google or the Apple systems are not really made for that sort of thing. So the way I helped solve that in Tusky is that we created a proxy server, which is basically using the Mastodon API in one end and putting that into the respective push notifications API of the app. on the other end. And yeah, that's the proxy server. Now, I know for a fact that the developer of Tusky has decided to take that away again and to fall back to polling for notifications instead of doing push notifications. So that's another thing. And one more thing is that there is an emerging web standard for push notifications. I think it's called Web Push. And that one obviously is way more suited for federation because it's directly from website to browser and doesn't rely on any it's just it's not bound to a single app developer, right? But that one only works with browsers. So if you're using the web app and not an app, you actually get real push notifications through the browser.
Right. Anyway, we're coming up on the hour, and I need to ask if anybody else has any unrequited questions. I'm looking over at Michael saying that Yammer's doing okay, but only in the MS ecosystem. So it's kind of an outlooky feeling.
Well, doing okay. I wouldn't say that. Microsoft paid what, 1.2 billion for it, then moved the development to the Microsoft Office, big Office 365 development team, and consequently all the Yammer original people then left. So if that's doing okay, that's, I suppose that's what Microsoft.
I think he meant still alive, basically.
Well, the name's still there, but as Corrado said earlier, it's a bit like Skype. The name's still there, but
well, Skype,
the internals have changed quite a bit.
As much as I dislike Skype, Skype is still the go-to, just like Facebook is. I mean, everybody's on Skype, and nobody cares. Nobody cares that it's Microsoft.
Check, please. Check, please. Check,
Yes.
please. They got a check, please. That was, it was. They did okay.
Yeah, 1.2 billion, absolutely.
Okay. Anyway, final questions and comments on Mastodon, past, present, and future.
If I have an
it was worth talking
observation,
about.
I can.
Go.
On the web interface, the size of the columns is not adjustable. If that could be made to be adjustable, it would be better.
I can tell by the
Just
smile he's heard that before.
I've heard that so many times before. There is a particular reason why they're not adjustable. And that reason is you can add or remove them as you want. You can have 16 columns, you can have 20 columns. And so it doesn't make sense to really scale them to the width of the browser window when it's intended that the window scrolls horizontally to fit everything. That's one reason. And the second reason is that it's easy for me to see how everything aligns and how spacing and padding and everything and margins look when it's a fixed size. When it just sort of scales infinitely into the wide, it sort of becomes like really hard to tell. Oh, is this going to look good or is this just going to look rubbish? So I've just stuck to that, and it's not a bad width, is it? Like the text doesn't break too many lines. Your eyes don't tire from reading it. I feel like it's just good enough. You don't and if you really want something like a really wide column, there are user styles for your browser you can download, or you can just customize the CSS of your instance.
Yeah. Okay.
And it would be a nightmare further to have to, because then, okay, so you could, if you could change the widths, but then you'd have to save that somewhere so that when they opened it the next time, it would all then, oh, well, how come they weren't saved? So, and then somebody would want to save various profiles. You can see where that would go, right? The infinite addition of complex code, slowing everything down, including updating new versions, and Hugo would go crazy and stop what he's doing. So I think we've done our job here, and I think Eugen, you are a surprisingly brilliant young man, because your answers were very, very concise and yet completely informational. I mean, you amaze me. I have a great admiration for you, and I hope we can have you back and talk about this again when, of course, a few things have happened, new things.
I happen to see a question on IRC that might be interesting from Kinus about auto translation. There is a plan to. Is there a plan to get auto translation on the system itself, or do you rely on client-side translation?
Auto translation would be immensely useful because we've got a really wide variety of languages on the platform. A lot of Japanese users, and I don't speak Japanese personally, so it would be really useful. However, to translate text, you need to either use Google or you need to use Bing. And that means you need API keys from either. And that means if there was some kind of auto-translate feature right in Mastodon, you would require every single admin of every single instance to go and fetch those keys. And they might not be free, or they might have usage limits. So it's really hard to implement that. However, as an app developer, you don't even care where the messages come from. You could implement that sort of auto-translate feature. So I'm hoping that apps just pick up the slack here, where it's not possible in the upstream.
Great answer. And I forgot to mention, I don't think this got mentioned, that in the early days, the Japanese really jumped on this. They were very, very interested in it. So if you were on social, which was the biggest instance, maybe still is, other than Pawoo.net, you had tons of Japanese. The federated timeline was unreadable because it was just filled, unless you knew Japanese, it was filled with Japanese, and then the occasional Portuguese, French, or Spanish, and then the very rare English would come in. So what happened fairly early on is that, Eugen, you put in a filter that can remove languages that you don't speak, which I think is a great idea. I did wonder why you didn't do the other way around, which is to just put the languages that you do speak in and let the rest of it go. It'll be too complicated to show this, but there's quite a long list. And recently on social, when I looked at it, there's a new language that is not filtered. I'll have to go look at my settings, but that's a good idea because this is all over the globe. We see lots of languages. There's probably 20 in the list at least.
Right. The reason why it's the other way around is because language detection is not 100% accurate. It gets more accurate the longer the text is, but because it's a microblogging network and many messages are just a couple words, it's really hard to tell which language it is. So if we implemented opt-in to languages, like only show me Finnish, then you would miss a lot of actually Finnish posts, and you would get some that aren't actually Finnish. So it's less noticeable that there is a deficiency like that if you just opt out, and then you just sort of remove the bulk of the probably posts that you don't understand, and then you still get like everything else that you might understand.
That's a great answer, and it proves what I said a few minutes ago. So this stuff is very, very well thought out, and I appreciate that. I'm going to bring Hugo in here too before we close. And Hugo, any plans, any future things? Would you be interested in doing this for something like WordPress someday? I know it's not very exciting, but because of what you do and how well you do it, I think maybe some other kind of automated platform creation would be interesting. Have you looking at any of that?
Not WordPress, that's for sure.
It's a bad example, but there's other things.
Yeah, it could. I could do something around other things, but I'm not. It needs to be something that I bump into, something that I look and I really believe, like for instance with Mastodon, I think what Eugen has been doing is really solid software. I install the updates, everything works. There is no issues with it, and so it's like I feel confident in it. Most software is not like that, and I'm not. So it's hard. I wanted to say something that I've forgotten before. When you said that you wanted to change the domain, you cannot change the domain. Everything is tied to the domain that you use on your instance, unless you delete everything and start anew. But you cannot just say, like you were saying, oh, you will ask me to change the name. I'll change the name of your instance, for instance, but I'll have to delete it, and everybody that follows you will lose track of you. They'll need to refollow you again. There are some technical things here, and I forgot before to mention that. As for me, I'll be doing many things. I'm also working alone. I have about 500 clients that I manage alone. Like I have 100 here, 400 in the business in Portugal, and I still do a couple other things. So it's I need to find something that I really see it catching up for me to dedicate all my attention there. I just like to try these things to see how they work, to learn how they work, and if something catches up, then I'll dedicate my my attention to it. I answer to the market and not what I would like to do, basically, in that case.
Okay, well, that's great. Yeah, as far as I understood, I assumed that we would delete. We're just experimental anyway. So if we were going to change it, we'll talk about that internally, but we would definitely delete. There's nothing of any particular value other than the little demo that we just did that's tied to my own personal Mastodon. So we may talk to you about that. Anyway, thank you very much, Hugo. And I know that your time is limited, and we appreciate the hour that you gave us. So thanks very much, and we'll be in touch. And as for you, Eugene, as I said, we hope to have you back maybe in 6 months or a year. We'll see what you're doing. But same question to you. I mean, what other pursuits do you think you will be into? Is Mastodon your main mission, or are you going to be doing other things?
I've been doing Mastodon for full-time, as a full-time thing for, close to 8 or 9 months now. So currently, it is my past, present, and future. I can't even imagine where I would go from here if I were to switch away, because it doesn't occur to me. And what could I do if I were to just stop doing Mastodon? Because Mastodon is something that I'm really proud of, and it goes way beyond anything that I've done before. On the other hand, I do have some ideas, maybe side projects that I could work on, which also have something to do with the Fediverse, with Federation, ActivityPub, and stuff like that. So maybe I'll branch out with that.
And we do need to. We do need to get you with the Matrix people. Maybe we should hook that up, because I think there's maybe some interesting synergy there. Okay, with that, we're going to conclude by just reminding everybody that you can go to joinmastodon.org for to choose an instance or learn more about Mastodon. And you can also have your own Mastodon hosted, masto.host, master.host. Thank you both very much. And thanks to everybody who participated. We're going to be unusually short today because I have something I have to run and do. And the first thing is to find the mouse cursor and the button to stop this. So thanks, and good night, Mrs. Lanningham, wherever you are.